Please be seated. I am to be here at All Saints. We've been here now right at 3 months, and it has been wonderful to get to know this church and congregation, as well as the city and its people. We have been welcomed in ways far beyond our expectations. Over the last few weeks, we've been celebrating stewardship. And while we do this annually, this year it's been with sincere gratitude that I have celebrated and prayed for the time and talent of our church. It is due to the work of each of you that we share in worship and ministry each week. And I can't tell you how wonderful it is to walk alongside you as we all follow the way of love. Our stewardship theme this year is rooted in abundance, and I want to elaborate on this a little bit today. Friday, we drove to Hot Springs via the scenic route. Woo! I love how only a few miles outside of town, the rolling hills and endless forests greet us. In the river valley, we are sandwiched between a couple of my favorite places, the Ozarks and the Ouachitas, and my screen stopped. And each of their rolling hills, each of them with their rolling hills of lush forests. Along the drive, the colors have not yet peaked, but already the light has taken on a golden hue, and the air is redolent with the sweet smell of fallen leaves. At home, we've opened the windows and allowed the house to air out. As we wound through the countryside, the road was dotted with farms and fields, and tractors were busy everywhere. It's that time of year. And forest to field, it's easy to see, I think, the work of God. We instinctually associate the natural world with God's creation. When we hear the creation stories, we just automatically imagine the flora and fauna we're familiar with, right? Plants and trees for us draw up images of pine and oak and, of course, the dogwood. Wheat, corn, rice, and beans are easy to imagine. Birds of the air, hawks, songbirds, and, of course, buzzards, and a few waterfowl. Animals of the land, foxes, cows, horses, bears, and coyotes. And you can tell that my imagination is still up there on a hilltop on Highway 7, where all we could see was rolling forests in every direction. Our part of the state is rich with the beauty of God's creation. And this, my friends, is the abundance to which we are rooted. For a few years, we have felt like we were on pause. The pandemic had a dramatic impact on our ability to gather and worship together. For many, it was a time of significant change and transition. For others, there has been true fear about the present and the future. Now, if we stay zoomed in on that time period, we might remain in a state of anxiety, focused on what we lost. But if we zoom out, we can begin to see that though things have changed, change is not necessarily always bad. Though things were hard for a while, difficulties will not last forever. Think about it. In the overarching timeline of history, pandemics are only a small blip in the storyline. Since the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus, history has recorded many pandemics. They say they come about every century, and humanity and Christianity have moved through all of them. So though our outward movement was stilled for a while, we continue to have deep roots in our community, where we may have had to prune some activities. This ultimately gives us a stronger structure for future growth. And I want you to know that this is what I'm finding and what I see at All Saints. A strongly rooted community that has been strengthened by the challenges of the last few years. I see us on the edge of great growth, prepared to move forward into the world, serving and worshiping from our great sources of strength. Rooted in the love and service, we are truly ready to share God's abundance with those around us. Now, over the generations, God has demonstrated love and care for God's people. Through many a pandemic and natural disaster, people have pulled together to make a stronger and more resilient community from which new growth can flourish. Yes, we may at times feel fear and anxiety about having enough to care for our families. But again, when we zoom out, we find that through the abundance of God's creation, there is enough for everyone. Yes, sometimes we may need to shift our perspective to truly feel the flow of God's gifts. But I am confident that God provides for God's people, his beloved. We often think of creation as a one-time event, like the Big Bang, boom. But the scriptures tell us otherwise. See, at the most basic level, the word in Hebrew that we translate as created actually denotes an ongoing event. It's more like God created, is created, and will continue to create. And don't we see this in the stories of the Bible? God is active in the world, forming and reforming the people in an ongoing creation towards the kingdom of God. This is what the Old Testament and the New Testament describe. And while those Bible stories may have ended a few centuries after God walked the earth as a man to guide us, God continues to act in history, forming and reforming us, providing the resources we need to help bring the kingdom of God nearer. Just because the stories stopped doesn't mean God's work stopped. God did create, God is created, and God will continue to create here and now, providing an abundance of gifts to the land, to the people, to each of us. So when we say we are rooted in abundance, it is not just our local resources we're talking about. We are drawing strength and beauty and love from the very heart of God's providence. We're not alone. We do not do this on our own. We are a church that draws from the rich soil that has been prepared especially for us to nurture and energize our work in the world. Because ultimately, this is not my ministry, it's not your ministry, but we do the ministry of God, participating in God's work, creating and forming a world shaped by God's love. So this year, during our Festival of Stewardship, I invite you to draw on that rich providence of God's gifts. remembering that we are deeply rooted in the beauty of our land and all that it provides, rooted in the people of our community, rooted in the richness of God's gifts to each of us, and rooted in the strength of God's love. And as we move into a new season of love and growth, I want you to know that with each new branch and with every leaf and every new bud, we as a community are cultivating God's love. Our church, our work, manifests the love of God into our community as a safe and loving place for all of God's children. And by drawing from the deep resources of God's creation and fueled by the light of God's love, our church is continuing and will continue the story of God's work in the world. Well, I